back, and such an honor for us to Skype in today. Josh Hasten, he is the international spokesperson for the Yeshua Council, which is representing the Jewish communities there in Judea and Samaria. He's also a Middle East correspondent for JNS and co-hosts a podcast and a radio show there on the Land of Israel radio network. So he's a busy guy, and he's giving us time today, so we value that greatly. The website is jns.org, and there's a picture of the landing page, jns.org. Very resourceful. And again, thank you, Josh, for your time. Can you give us an update on Gaza and Hamas? Is it over, or is it still happening?
No, it's definitely still happening. I mean, Israel certainly has given a strong beatdown to Hamas, but you still have now Hamas insurgencies in different cities and towns where Israel has already swept through. So in other words, Israel is going into those towns such as Khan Yunis and Gaza City again, because Hamas is starting to, or has been, regrouping now for some time. Israel made it down to Rafah and took control of the Philadelphia corridor, which is the most strategic area there, which is the border essentially between Egypt and Gaza, in order to cut off the weapons smuggling down there. But at the same time, Israel is now forced to go back into the different towns and wipe out the remaining Hamas cells which pop up in those areas. So we are definitely on the way towards victory. I think it's taken a little longer than a lot of people thought, but we have to crush whatever remains of the Hamas terrorist regime. That is one of the three goals the prime minister laid out at the beginning of the war. Number one, Hamas must be eliminated. Number two, we have to secure the release of our hostages. And the way it's going, we certainly have to do so through military means. And number three, Gaza can no longer be a threat to the state of Israel. And until all those three goals are not accomplished, we will still maintain our military presence in Gaza. The war will continue. All those three have to be met. And then after the war, Israel will certainly, I believe, will have to maintain some sort of presence in that area. Our biggest problem was in 2005. Israel pulled out all of our civilians and all of our military from Gaza. And that's why we got October the 7th. So we cannot let that repeat itself. As much as Hamas would like to do it, and then the other terror organizations throughout Judea and Samaria would like to do something very, very similar, whether it's the Fatah, Palestinian Authority, other Hamas-related organizations, Islamic Jihad. We can't let that happen anywhere in Israel. Unfortunately, the perfect example is Gaza, where Israel pulled out, and we got October the 7th. It can't happen again. We have to take care of business and finish Hamas till the last man.
It's been said, Josh, that Gaza was a test two-state solution that blew up on October 7th. Is that a fair analysis?
I would say it's definitely a fair analysis for all of those who were sleeping until then, but people like myself and a lot of my colleagues, we knew right away, not only from 2005 when Israel pulled out of Gaza, but when Israel entered the dreaded or dreadful Oslo Accords back in the 90s, when Israel decided to hand over land to the Palestinian Authority. At that time, it was Yasser Arafat. We knew way back then that this was a huge mistake. It was going to come back to bite us. Every single inch of territory that Israel has turned over to the Palestinian Authority has become a hotbed of terrorism. In Gaza, the situation was 2005, Israel turned over that land to the PA, and within 2 years, Hamas carried out a brutal takeover, literally throwing the Palestinian Authority members off roofs. Again, the PA, we have to remember, those guys are terrorists in suits. That's the difference between them and Hamas. Hamas doesn't wear a uniform, but nevertheless, it was a painful lesson. October the 7th. It showed what happened to those who were still asleep. What happened when you turned over land? Let's remember the rockets started way back in 2001. So we've had rocket fire for 20 plus years here in Israel. We knew who Hamas was. And those who didn't get the memo certainly got it on October the 7th with the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, with over 1,200 massacred by Hamas. Hamas must go.
There's a part of this Hamas-Gaza thing that kind of got our brain on tilt, and that is when you finally got in there and you start pushing back and you uncover all the cells. There were endless tunnels that went to Egypt. And how do you explain that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where was Egypt all these years? Back in, I think it was in 2015, Egypt knew about the tunnels, and Egypt actually flooded some of these tunnels with water in order to literally drown out the terrorists. But where have they been? Instead of taking in those who are trapped in the war right now, they've completely sealed their border. So, any other situation in the world where you have a conflict, you have a military conflict, there's humanitarian aid in the form of allowing refugees to leave the battlefield. That's not the case. Egypt has fortified their border. And in terms of the tunnel, I mean, they've been turning essentially a blind eye for many, many years. Back, as I mentioned, 2015, they were actually doing something. But since then, this has been they discovered these tunnels are essentially underground highways going from Egypt through the border there underground leading into Gaza. And that's how Hamas has been bringing in these Iranian-made weapons for years and years. It used to be that they would process these weapons, make them on their own. Literally, I saw it with my own eyes, cutting down light poles, turning them into rockets, and putting in the warheads and firing them into Israel. Those were back in the 2000s. But now you have more advanced weaponry, and Hamas has fired thousands and thousands of rockets. The majority of them are Iranian-made, smuggled into Gaza from Egypt. And that is an excellent question. Where has Egypt been all these years? Israel and Egypt certainly have a peace treaty. It's been a cold peace since way back since 1979 when they started negotiating and signing a peace deal. But why have they let Hamas continue to do that all of these years? Where's the world community? Where's the outrage? From bodies like the UN. And I say that half laughingly because I don't expect any outrage from the UN when it comes to dealing with a situation like that. But where has Egypt been all these years?
Great question. The Abraham Accords seems to still be holding, and with the threat of Iran now being the supplier to all these proxies out there, do you think Saudi Arabia will join the accord?
I think they will, but I think that they certainly will not under the current administration in Washington. As I said before, this is the Middle East, and this is where strength dominates. And Saudi Arabia sees the Biden administration as a very weak administration. They are certainly not going to put their trust in the Joe Bidens and the Kamala Harrises of this world. If President Donald Trump becomes president once again, I think it will be very, very quick into his term when Israel and the Saudis sit down once again and come up with a normalization agreement. It was President Trump who assisted greatly in bringing Israel together with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and the others who signed the agreement there. And I think it's a matter of time. I think it will happen. But now that you see you have a weak administration in Washington, all of a sudden the Saudi Arabians, the Saudis have all sorts of terms for the agreement. The war has to end, they say. They want a two-state solution. This is all fluff, in my opinion. I think that they would sign an agreement tomorrow if they trusted the person in the White House, if they saw strength and not weakness, if they saw somebody who was willing to confront Iran. In recent months, actually, the Saudis have sort of warmed up to the Iranians because of the fact that they don't want to be hurt by Iran. They're neighbors with Iran. They don't want to come under missile threat from Iran. They've been fighting with the Houthis for years. But Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, has warmed up a little bit to Iran, and that is because they don't trust the administration in Washington. Once they're able to do that again, I think you will see very, very swift movement in terms of a normalization deal between Israel and the Saudis.
It appears that the meeting with the Prime Minister and Vice President Harris was short and might even left somewhat contentious because of Vice President's empathy for the Palestinians. Am I reading that wrong?
No, you're reading that correctly. I mean, first of all, the vice president did not show up to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech to a joint session of Congress last Wednesday. That was the first indicator as to where she stands. And then in her initial remarks following the meeting, she started talking about how the United States and her administration, the Biden administration, support Israel. But then she immediately shifted and put the focus on Gaza, on the suffering of the people in Gaza, and not really taking Hamas to task, not saying that the situation is as it is because Hamas uses its own population as human shields. Hamas must stop firing rockets into Israel. Hamas must release the hostages. Hamas must lay down their arms. she put the onus on Israel and put the blame on Israel. So how can you have a productive meeting between world leaders when you have one side who, by the way, she waited until Netanyahu left. It was only after the meeting, the prime minister was gone, and then she really ripped into Israel in terms of our policy in Gaza, as if October 7th didn't happen, as if Hamas and 3,000 of their terrorists and supporters, let's remember, civilians or so-called civilians also crossed that border as well and came into Israel and carried out some of the most horrible acts in the history of humanity. They came over here, and Harris turned very, very quickly and put the attention and the blame, if you will, on Israel instead of on the terrorists of Hamas. So there's a serious problem here if she continues down this path. And there's a lot of time, folks, between now and the election in November, and between now and January, when the next president, hopefully not Kamala Harris, and I have no problem saying that, takes over, but she can do a lot of damage. And we saw that just from the remarks that she made following the meeting with the Israeli prime minister.
30 seconds. How's the resolve of the citizenry there in Israel, given the fact that you've been living with war for 75 years?
It's unexplainable. It's unexplainable. The fact that I'm sitting here in Judea, the hills of Judea, and I'm literally listening to children outside playing right on the field next door to my house. It's something unbelievable.
Okay.
And just 50 kilometers to the south and another 80, 90 kilometers to the north, there are two wars essentially taking place right now. But the Israeli people are the most resilient people in the world. We've been down this path for 4,000 years, and we'll continue to be resilient despite it all. We will come out on top. It's a battle of good versus evil. We are on the side of good.
Josh, thank you for your time. Thoughts and prayers go with you. Say to our viewers and listeners, go to jns.org, and you can keep track of all the things that are going on there and read his articles. Blessings on you, friend. Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.